Building Rural Wealth, Dan Miller and Amy Shipley with me this morning. Is your practice paying what you're worth? Okay, this is an interesting one. Start me off here, Amy. What are we talking about?
Yeah, so that is an interesting question, isn't it? Is your practice paying you what you're worth? And you would think so, right? But we're going to talk today a little bit about some things that might surprise you. If you own a medical or dental practice, there's a question that's worth asking yourself, and is that, are you being paid what you're worth? And we're not just talking about what you take home. It's how is your income structured? How consistent is it? Does it support your long-term goals? You know, we've seen practice owners who are doing very well on paper. They've got strong revenue, busy schedules, a growing patient base, but when you look closer, there can be some gaps between what the practice produces and what the owner actually keeps. And high income doesn't always mean optimized income. So today, what Dan's going to talk a little bit about is where compensation gaps tend to show up, what might be quietly impacting profitability, and how to align your income with retirement and tax strategy.
Okay. I'm not sure we've talked about this before. So, Dan, what's the owner pay gap?
Well, the owner pay gap, I can relate to this sometimes, because, and actually this could go with any business, not just dental and medical practices. This could go with any type of kind of owner operated type firms or, a firm like ours. It could go to a law firm. It could apply to, any kind of a professional firm like that where, maybe you're busy, maybe you're taking in a lot of money, and doing things, but you're like, is it doing what it should do? And that owner pay gap, that's kind of the difference between what the practice generates and what the owner actually takes home in an structured, intentional way. In other words, is it structured to actually, do the things they want to do? And compensation isn't always consistent for any kind of self-employed people and, practice owners, again, any type of self-employed folks. It can vary based on their cash flow, their reinvestment decisions, equipment needs, staffing. Staffing is huge. And some of the common patterns we see is, owners oftentimes pay themselves what's left over. And that's so true. I mean, yeah. I can speak from that. I mean, that's just, especially businesses when they're starting out. We see that a lot, with different types. Inconsistent distributions. Again, a lot of businesses, including dental practices or any medical practices, they're seasonal. People come and go at different times of the year. And so there's inconsistent patterns. And they may not have set up any clear salary or profit structure. Now, usually if you talk to a tax accountant or someone like that, they're going to recommend that you do have some type, if you have a practice of some kind, they're going to recommend that you do set up some type of salary because you need to pay into the Medicare system. The IRS is going to look at that. If all you're ever doing is just taking profit distributions, and again, I'm not a tax accountant, but you need to visit with your own. But oftentimes they're going to look at that because without structure, your income can feel very unpredictable. Even in very successful businesses, very successful practices. And, in some cases, owners haven't even compared their compensation to any broader benchmarks. They don't even know, is my practice doing what it should be doing for me?
Yeah.
If you step back and looked at your compensation objectively, would it reflect the value that you feel like you are truly creating?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what about some of those hidden profit drains, Amy? What do we need to be looking at there?
Sure. We wanted to mention that little small inefficiencies can quietly erode your income. And so you really kind of need to be constantly looking at things. One of those is your staffing structure. Like Dan pointed out, labor is pretty much the largest expense of any business. And you have to think about, are there inefficiencies with your staffing payments? Are you overstaffed during slower periods? Do you have some underutilized roles? Are there misaligned responsibilities? That's one area where you might have some inefficiencies that you can look at. Another one is equipment. utilization. That's another big expense for small business owners. So, are you buying a lot of expensive equipment but not necessarily using it to its full capacity? So, for an example, with technology these days, that could increase your production, but are you fully using it and integrating it to its full capacity? The other area would be operational inefficiencies. Are there scheduling gaps that you have? Do you have bottlenecks in your workflow? Are there administrative redundancies? Just all of these little factors together can influence your profitability and productivity. So it's a good idea to kind of look at those things.
So let's talk about aligning salary, retirement, and of course, Dan, taxes.
Taxes. Yeah.
Always with the taxes.
You knew it would always come back. It comes back to taxes.
We always get there.
Well, Aaron, oftentimes how you are paid may be just about as important as, how much you're getting paid. So let's assume your practice or your business is producing well. The next question becomes, how is that income structured? Because compensation for owners isn't just about take-home pay. It can influence your retirement contributions, your tax exposure, your long-term planning. All those things come into it. For example, I touched on it just a minute ago, taking a salary versus distributions, or profit distributions, in other words. For some structures, how income is split matters. This is where you got to coordinate that with your CPA. And, and I know I talk with my tax people all the time because, it's tempting to want to take income as distributions and not salary, because that way you don't pay as much Social Security. But then on the other hand, you need to pay into Social Security, of course, and you need to contribute to the system for yourself and for others. And so there's always considerations there if you're a business owner. Component number 2 is your retirement plan integration. Just had this talk with another gentleman not too long ago. Is how are you paying your people and how are you paying yourself? Because that's going to determine if you can have retirement distributions or contributions, contributions, because, if you have a 401k plan, in our firm, we have a 401k plan. We can make we make 401k contributions to people.
Sure.
But if you're paying your employees primarily as 1099, contractors or something like that, you can't have a 401k plan for that type of situation. And you also need to be talking with your CPA to make sure that, because there's rules about how many hours they work. Are they now contractors or are they full-time employees? So again, I'm not going to get into the tax side of any of that stuff, but that brings me to component number 3, which is that tax awareness.
Taxes.
And so, it's not always just minimizing taxes, but aligning those decisions with your long-term goals, because it's not just what you earn, it's how much your income flows through your plan and how much you get to keep. But I don't know how many times I've told clients this from different things, you also can't solely let the tax tail wag the dog. In other words, you have to make the best decisions for your business as a whole and as how you're going to get compensated, not solely from the tax lens. Taxes are always got to be, considered, but you can't make that decision based 100% on the tax implications.
Good information. Dan Miller with me and Amy Shipley from Milestone Financial, building real well. So, Amy, bring this all together for me.
Okay, Aaron. Well, when we look at everything as a whole, your compensation structure, like we talked about, operational efficiencies, profitability, long-term planning, you see that it is all connected, and a successful practice can still leave opportunity on the table. So if you looked at your practice from the outside, what would stand out? Like the original question said, is your practice paying you what you really are worth? Not just in income, like Dan mentioned, but in how that income supports your future, your retirement. The goal is to make sure that your successful practice translate into long-term financial clarity. So if you would like some help reviewing some of these points that we talked about today, retirement strategy, tax strategy, coordinating with your CPA, give us a call, and we'd be happy to have that conversation. Our number is 712-623-5726, and our website is milestonefinancialgroup.com.